My name is Renata, and I was 31 years old the April my sisters decided I was too negative to celebrate. That's the word they used. Negative. My younger sister Priya said it first, on a group call I wasn't supposed to be on, and my older sister Delia repeated it to my mother so many times over the following weeks that Mom eventually started using it herself, as if she'd always believed it, as if she hadn't raised me in the same house, at the same table, cutting the same birthday cakes. We just think celebrations go better when the energy is lighter, Delia told me, 3 days before Mom's 63rd birthday dinner. It's not personal. We talked about it. I didn't argue. I'd learned by then that arguing was the kind of thing that proved their point. So I said I understood. And then I went home and sat with what that meant. Here's what I didn't say out loud. My mother owned 4 properties in this county. I had spent 6 years working as a real estate paralegal. And my mother had called me into her kitchen the previous October and asked me to sit down at the table and witness something. I witnessed it. I signed where the notary told me to sign. And then I folded that afternoon into the back of my memory and went on with my life. What happened 14 months later, when a title officer came to my mother's house and read a document aloud in front of both of my sisters, changed every assumption they'd ever made about me. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where quiet people let the paperwork do the talking. If this is your first time here, take a moment to subscribe. We post new stories every week, and the comment section is always worth reading. People who work in real estate law develop a particular relationship with paper. You learn early that sentiment doesn't mean anything until it's recorded. A promise is air. A deed is stone. You can love someone your whole life, say all the right things at every holiday and leave them exactly nothing, and the law doesn't blink. It just processes what was filed. I understood this before I was 25. It came with the job. My name is Renata, and I grew up in a mid-sized city in the Midwest, Dayton, Ohio, in a house that felt large when I was small and felt smaller every year I got older. My mother, Abina, was a woman who organized her life around ritual. Sunday dinners. Birthday cakes with the exact same frosting every year. Christmas cards sent before December 1st. She believed that if you kept the forms of a family intact, the feeling would follow. I think she was mostly right about that for most of her life. My father died when I was 12. He left behind a modest life insurance payout, a 1998 Buick, and 3 daughters who processed his absence in 3 completely different ways. Delia, the oldest by 6 years, became practical. She married quickly, settled into a suburb 20 minutes from Mom, and began positioning herself as the family manager. She was good at it. She made the calls, organized the dinners, remembered everyone's allergies. I admired that for a long time, before I understood what the managing was actually for. Priya, the middle one, became everyone's favorite. She was warm, funny, socially effortless in a way that I was not. People lit up when she walked into a room. I don't hold that against her, she came by it honestly. But somewhere in her 20s, she started using that warmth the way some people use a credit card, to smooth things over in the moment, to defer the harder accounting. And then there was me. I was the one who read the fine print, who asked questions at the wrong time, who, at my father's estate meeting with the attorney, was 14 years old and asked what probate meant and got told by Delia to stop interrupting. I wasn't interrupting. I was learning. After college, I went to work as a paralegal at a real estate firm in Columbus. I handled title searches, deed transfers, easement filings, estate property transitions. For 6 years, I sat across from families at some of the most important and frequently worst moments of their financial lives, and I helped them understand what the document said. I was good at it. I was careful, and I didn't talk more than I needed to, and clients trusted me. I lived modestly. 1-bedroom apartment, used car, food-packed lunches. I wasn't saving for anything specific. I just didn't spend money I didn't need to spend. My mother once told me I reminded her of my father's mother, a woman who kept her savings in an envelope under the kitchen floorboard because she didn't trust banks. I took it as a compliment. I visited Mom every few weeks. She was 62 that first year I'm talking about, healthy, active, sharp as she'd always been. She gardened. She took a ceramics class on Thursday evenings at the community center. She had friends from church who came for tea on Saturday afternoons. Her life was full in the way that quiet people's lives are full, not loudly, but densely. What she also had, though I didn't fully know this until my late 20s, was 4 properties. The house she lived in, the house we grew up in, was hers outright, paid off when I was in high school. But there were also 2 rental duplexes on the east side of Dayton that she'd inherited from her own mother, and a small commercial strip property on a county road that she'd purchased with a portion of my father's life insurance payout, quietly, without telling any of us. She didn't talk about money. It was one of the ways she was most thoroughly herself. I knew about the rentals because I'd helped her once with a lease renewal question. I didn't know about the commercial property until much later. And I didn't know what she'd been thinking for years, while she watched her 3 daughters grow up and become who they were going to be. My mother is not a dramatic woman. She doesn't make speeches. She doesn't call family meetings. She processes things slowly, and then she acts, quietly, with a completeness that only becomes clear later. The first indication I had that something had shifted in her thinking was the summer I was 29, when she called me on a Wednesday evening and asked if I could come by the house that weekend. Not for dinner, not for anything specific, she just wanted me to come by. I drove up on Saturday morning. She made tea. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd cut every birthday cake for 30 years, and she told me she'd been thinking about the properties. I want to understand what happens to them, she said, when I'm gone. I told her that depended on whether she had a will, and whether the properties were titled in her name alone, and whether she'd set up any kind of trust or transfer on death arrangement. She said she had a will from 2004 that she wasn't sure was still right. I said we should look at it. We spent 2 hours at that table. I pulled up the county recorder's website on my laptop and showed her how to look up her own parcels. I explained what tenants in common meant versus joint tenancy. I explained what a deed of gift was and what a ladybird deed was, and what the difference was between a beneficiary designation and a testamentary bequest. She listened to all of it without interrupting. When I was done, she said, "I always knew you were the one to talk to about this." I didn't know what that meant at the time. I thought she was just being kind. She wasn't just being kind. Over the next 2 years, I drove up to Dayton roughly once a month. We'd have dinner, talk about the properties, talk about her plans. She asked me questions I answered carefully and honestly. She made decisions at her own pace, which was slow and certain. In October of the year I turned 31, she called and told me she'd made an appointment with a notary. "I want you there," she said, "as a witness." I went. I sat at the kitchen table. A notary named Diane Hofstetter came and laid out 4 documents, one for each property, and my mother signed them in her clear, careful handwriting, and I signed as witness alongside the notary. Mom didn't explain what she was doing in detail, and I didn't press. I understood enough. She was putting her affairs in order, the way organized people do before anything goes wrong, not in response to crisis. I signed. I went home. I didn't tell my sisters. It wasn't that I was hiding anything. It wasn't my information to share. It was my mother's business, and my mother didn't believe in announcing her intentions until she was ready. I went back to my life. I worked my caseload. I packed my lunches. I called Mom on Sundays. 3 weeks after the notary appointment, Delia called me with the news about the birthday dinner. I should explain something about my family before I explain what happened with the birthday. Delia has always been the one who decides things. This is partly personality and partly the gap in our ages. She's 40, I'm 31, and for most of my childhood that 9-year difference meant she had authority by default. She organized the holidays. She decided who brought what to dinners. She was the family's operating system, and for a long time that worked because she was actually competent at it. But somewhere in the last several years, the managing had started to drift. I noticed it first when she began describing family decisions she and Priya had already made, as family decisions, with an emphasis that was supposed to make them sound collective and didn't. She'd send a group message. "We decided we're doing Christmas at my place this year, is that okay?" And the asking at the end wasn't really asking. I went along with most of it because most of it didn't matter enough to contest. The birthday dinner was different. Delia called on a Wednesday evening. Her voice was the particular warmth she used for difficult conversations, rounded at the edges, deliberately careful. She said Mom's 63rd birthday dinner was coming together, and she was handling the reservations, and she wanted to talk to me about the guest list. I remember the slight dropping sensation in my chest when she said guest list. Guest list for a family birthday dinner.
6 people.
A guest list. We've been talking, she said. Priya and me, and actually we mentioned it to Mom as well. We just think, Renata, I want to say this in the nicest way, we just think celebrations go better when the energy is lighter. I asked her what that meant. You have a way of bringing a kind of weight to things, she said. Not on purpose. We know it's not on purpose. But birthdays should be fun, and we just want Mom to have a really fun evening. Asked if this was her decision or Mom's. There was a pause. We talked about it together. Mom agreed it might be better. The thing about being told you're too negative for celebrations is that there's no good response. If you get upset, you prove the point. If you're calm about it, they take it as confirmation that you didn't really care. The trap is airtight. Okay, I said. We knew you'd understand, Delia said, and her relief was audible, which told me she'd been more uncertain than she'd sounded. I hung up and stood in my kitchen for a while. Then I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. Her voice had the slightly muffled quality of someone who'd been asleep, even though it was only 7:30. Delia told me, I said.
A pause.
Renata. It's okay, Mom. I just wanted to hear your voice. We talked for a few minutes about nothing, about her garden, about the ceramics class. I didn't ask her to explain. I didn't want to put her in the middle. Whatever Delia had said to her about me, Mom had agreed, and that was something I had to sit with rather than argue against. I spent Mom's 63rd birthday eating dinner at a Thai restaurant near my apartment, alone, at a table for 2. The couple at the next table were celebrating something. She had a small plastic crown on, the kind you get at those party supply stores. They were laughing about something private. I ordered pad CEW and a glass of wine, and I ate my dinner, and I went home. That was year 1. Year 2, Delia didn't even call ahead. She just sent a group message that didn't include me in the recipient list. I found out from Priya, who texted me by accident, realized her mistake, and then didn't text again. I spent that birthday helping my neighbor Quibina patch a water-damaged ceiling in his apartment. His wife, Simone, made groundnut soup for dinner and insisted I stay. I stayed. Year 3, I found out about the dinner when my mother mentioned, casually on our Sunday call 3 days after, that the food at the restaurant had been disappointing. She didn't explain why she was telling me. I think she felt guilty and didn't know how to say so. I said I was sorry the food was bad. She said, well, the company was nice. I wasn't sure if she meant that as comfort or as something else. I let it go. Year 4 was when things started to move. By this time I had become, through no particular plan, very close with a group of people I had not expected to matter as much as they did. It started with Quibina and Simone, my neighbors. They'd moved in across the hall 3 years prior, originally from Accra via London, both warm people with a wide social world that I'd been slowly absorbed into without quite noticing it was happening. Their Saturday dinners had started as occasional and become weekly. Their friends had become my friends. When Simone got her permanent residency approval, they threw a party that ran until 2 in the morning, and I realized at some point during that party that I was having more fun than I'd had in years, and that the people in that living room knew me better than my sisters did. I also, by year 4, had a colleague named Tomas who was covering the same real estate files I was at the firm, and whose family had adopted me into their holiday table, without ceremony. His mother, Concepcion, called me by my first name with such warmth that it took me a while to get used to. His 3 younger siblings treated me like a slightly confusing older sister, which I appreciated more than I could have explained. And there was my mother's neighbor, a woman named Dorothy Achempong, no relation to me, despite the Ghanaian surname, who was 81 years old and who had lived next door to our family home since before I was born. Dorothy had watched me grow up. She had opinions about everything, stated plainly and without apology, and she was one of the 2 or 3 people in my life who I was certain would always tell me the truth. Dorothy had been watching my mother more closely than any of us had asked her to. She told me, on one of my regular visits, that she'd noticed Delia coming by with paperwork, that she'd seen Priya's car in the driveway on weekdays when my mother hadn't mentioned visits. That twice she'd seen a man she didn't recognize, not family, going in and out of the house with Delia. "I don't know what they're up to," Dorothy said, in the flat, precise way she had. "But your mother looks tired when they leave." I noted that. I didn't act on it immediately, but I noted it. Mom's 64th birthday dinner, year 4, happened on a Saturday in April. I wasn't invited. The dinner was at Delia's house this time, which was new. Delia sent me a message the morning of that said, simply, "Hope you have a good day, Renata." I sent back, "You too." I spent that evening at Simone and Quabina's. Simone made jollof and fried plantains, and their friend Alma brought a chocolate cake for no particular reason, and we sat around their dining table until past midnight talking about nothing consequential. My face was warm from the food and from laughing. At some point, I realized I hadn't thought about the birthday dinner in hours. When I drove home, I sat in my car for a moment in the parking structure. I thought about the October morning at my mother's kitchen table. The 4 documents. My signature next to the notary's stamp. I didn't know exactly what my mother had done. She hadn't told me, and I hadn't asked, and the professional part of my brain had deliberately held itself back from drawing conclusions. But I had a general idea. And I understood, in that parking structure, that whatever was coming had already been decided. My mother had decided it a long time ago, before any of this birthday nonsense. Before Delia's calls and Priya's strategic forgetting, and 4 years of dinners I wasn't at. All that was left was for the paperwork to speak. The call that moved everything came in early March, about 11 months after year 4's birthday dinner. My mother called me on a Sunday afternoon. This was unusual. She usually called in the evening, after her tea. She sounded composed but slightly clipped, the way she gets when she has something to say and is ordering it carefully in her mind. "Delia has been asking me to add her name to the rental properties," she said. I waited. "She says it would make things easier. For when I'm gone. So nothing gets complicated." I said, as carefully as I could. "What does she mean by easier?" She showed me some papers she printed. Something about avoiding probate. I had to be measured about what I said next. I asked Mom if she'd signed anything. She said no, not yet, that Delia wanted to bring a notary by next weekend. I asked her to wait. I didn't explain why. I just asked her to tell Delia she needed more time to think. "Delia won't like that," she said. "I know. Tell her anyway." There was a pause. Then my mother said something I'll hold on to for a long time. "I was hoping you'd say that." I called the firm's senior estate attorney, Gloria Park, the next morning and described the situation in general terms. Gloria said what I expected her to say, that adding a name to a property deed without proper legal guidance was often the fastest way to create expensive complications, tax exposure, loss of step-up basis, potential issues with Medicaid planning, co-ownership disputes. That if the goal was to simplify estate transfer, there were cleaner instruments already on record if they existed. She asked if I knew whether any instruments were already on record. I said I had reason to believe they might be. She said then there might be nothing to add. I called Mom back that evening and told her to let me make an appointment. Not a notary, a title officer. Someone who could pull the current property records and explain exactly what was already there. I told her we'd do it as a family meeting, everyone together, so nothing felt secretive. Mom agreed. I could hear something ease in her voice when she did. I called Delia and told her Mom wanted to do a family meeting about the properties before making any decisions. That a title officer would come to the house and go through what was on record. Delia's voice went smooth and careful. "That sounds like a lot, Renata. I'm not sure Mom needs all that formality. She just wants things to be simple." "I think Mom wants to understand what she has," I said. That's what she told me. A pause. Okay, if that's what she wants. Priya, when I called her, was easier. She just said, "Sure, whatever works as long as we're not doing it on the weekend I have Caden's soccer tournament." We scheduled it for a Thursday evening, for weeks out. I contacted a title and escrow officer named Bernadette Mensa, who I'd worked with 3 times through the firm. She was experienced, unflappable, and very good at explaining complex documents to people who weren't in the industry. She agreed to come out for a flat consultation fee. The 4 weeks between the call and the appointment were quiet. Delia called Mom twice that I knew of, once to suggest they could handle things more simply without the meeting, once to bring up the notary again. Mom said she wanted to wait. Delia called me once to say she hoped I wasn't making this into something it didn't need to be. I said I hoped so too. Dorothy called me the Tuesday before the meeting. She said Delia had come by the house that Saturday and stayed for 3 hours, and that when she'd left, my mother had stood on the porch for a long time without going back inside. Your mother is tired, Dorothy said again. Not sick. Tired. I said I knew. You're doing the right thing, she said, in the precise, flat way that meant she wasn't saying it to make me feel better. She was saying it because she believed it. The Thursday of the meeting arrived. I drove up to Dayton in the late afternoon. The light was that particular low spring quality, long and golden and slightly dusty, that makes everything in the Midwest look like a photograph of itself. I parked in front of the house. The forsythia in the front yard was coming in, the same forsythia that had been there my whole life. Delia's car was already in the driveway. Priya arrived 3 minutes after me. We went inside together, which was awkward in the tight way that things are awkward when people are being polite out of necessity rather than feeling. My mother was at the kitchen table. She looked calm. She'd made tea. She had the ceramic teapot out, the one with the brown glaze she'd made in her Thursday class. Something tightened in my chest when I saw her hands around that teapot, still and steady. Bernadette arrived at 6 o'clock exactly, carrying a leather portfolio and a county records printout. She was a compact, precise woman in her 50s who shook hands with each of us and sat down at the table with the air of someone who did this regularly and had no stake in any of it. I'll go through what's currently recorded on each parcel, she said. And then if there are questions, we'll answer them. This is just about understanding what's on record. Delia said pleasantly, we appreciate you coming. I don't think there's much to go through. It should be pretty straightforward. Bernadette said, let's see. She opened the portfolio. She set 4 property sheets on the table, one for each parcel, and began with the one I knew best, the house we grew up in. She read the ownership information. Mom's name. No changes. She moved to the first rental duplex. She read the ownership information. Priya frowned.
Said nothing.
She moved to the second rental duplex. Read the ownership information. Delia's hands went very still on the table. She had been reaching for her tea.
She stopped reaching.
Bernadette set down the second sheet and picked up the fourth, the commercial strip property, the one I hadn't known about until that October. She read the owner of record. The room went quiet in the particular way that rooms go quiet when something that has been true for a while becomes undeniable. My mother was looking at the teapot. Let me back up and explain what Bernadette read. In October, 14 months before that Thursday evening, my mother had signed 4 documents at this same kitchen table. 4 deed transfers. She had not retitled all 4 properties identically. She'd been thoughtful about it, in the way she was thoughtful about everything. The family home remained solely in her name. She'd made no changes to that one. The first rental duplex, the larger of the 2, the one generating the most rental income, had been retitled. The new deed listed my mother's name and mine as joint tenants with right of survivorship, meaning that upon her death, without probate, without a will contest, without a family meeting to hash things out, the property would pass to me. The second rental duplex had been placed into a revocable living trust, with me named as the successor trustee and sole beneficiary. The commercial property, the one I hadn't known about until Bernadette laid the sheet on the table, had been transferred entirely into that same trust. My mother had been managing rental properties for 20 years. She'd done this without fanfare, without announcement, without anyone's help or permission. The commercial strip brought in a consistent monthly income. The duplexes were fully rented. The trust, drafted by an attorney my mother had consulted quietly without telling anyone, transferred the entire structure outside of probate entirely. She had done this 14 months ago. She had done this 3 weeks after she'd called me and asked me to drive up and sit with her at this table and witness what she was signing. And she had not told Delia. She had not told Priya. She had told no one because it was her business to tell or not to tell, and she had chosen to wait. Bernadette read through the documents in the quiet, measured way of someone who has delivered this kind of information before. She used the exact language of the instruments. She did not editorialize. When she finished, she set the sheets on the table in a neat stack and asked if there were questions. Delia said, very carefully, "Can you read the first rental property again?" Bernadette read it again. There was a pause of perhaps 5 seconds. I counted them internally without meaning to. Delia turned to my mother. "Mom, when did you do this?" My mother looked up from the teapot. Her voice was even, unhurried, the voice she uses when she's been thinking about what to say for a long time. "About 14 months ago," she said. "After I spoke with an attorney. You did this without telling us. I told Renata I needed her to come and witness some documents. That's all I told her." Priya had not spoken. She was looking at the property sheets with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. Not anger, not shock, something quieter, something more like the feeling of suddenly recognizing a room you thought you knew. Delia turned to me. "Did you know what was in these?" Something went very still in my shoulders. I looked at her steadily. I knew Mom wanted to organize her estate. I didn't see the final documents until tonight. That was true. I had signed as a witness. A witness attests to the signature, not necessarily the content. I hadn't looked closely at the deed language. I hadn't let myself. Delia's jaw tightened once, and then she smoothed it. Bernadette, who had been waiting with professional patience, said, "Are there any other questions about what's on record?"
No one said anything.
"Then I think we're done," she said. She packed her portfolio, shook my mother's hand, and left. The 4 of us sat in the kitchen. The teapot was in the middle of the table. Outside the window, the forsythia was yellow in the last of the spring light. My mother poured herself a cup of tea. The weeks after the Thursday meeting moved in stages, the way these things do. The first stage was silence. Delia left without eating the dinner my mother had prepared, a pot of stew that had been on the stove since that afternoon. Priya stayed, though she was quiet, and ate half a bowl without tasting it and drove home before 8. My mother and I ate together at the table where the property sheets had been spread out 2 hours before. She didn't bring it up. We talked about the ceramics class, about a crack that had appeared in the back fence that she wanted to get repaired before summer. When I left, she hugged me in the doorway. She held on a beat longer than usual. That was all. The second stage began about a week later, when Delia called me. I almost didn't recognize her voice at first, not because it was different in quality but because it was different in temperature. The rounded warmth was gone. She sounded tired, and underneath the tiredness there was something thinner and more careful. "I've been thinking about our meeting," she said. I said I had been too. "I think we got off on the wrong foot. I don't think Mom fully understood what she was signing. She's not a young woman, Renata. She doesn't fully understand real estate instruments." I thought about the 2 hours my mother and I had spent at this same table 3 years ago, while she asked careful questions about tenants in common and transfer on death arrangements. About the attorney she'd consulted without telling anyone. About the way she'd said, "I was hoping you'd say that," when I asked her to wait before signing Delia's papers. I said, "Mom understood exactly what she was signing." A pause. "I'm not sure that's." "She understood it, Delia." There was a long silence. When Delia spoke again, her voice had shifted again. Lower, more careful. "I just don't understand why she didn't tell us. Why she would do this without talking to the family." I said, "She was talking to the family. She was talking to me." I heard something in the silence that followed that I did not feel triumphant about, a kind of flattening, the sound of someone recalculating in real time. I had not designed this. My mother had designed this, years ago, patiently, without anyone's help. "What happens next?" Delia asked. "Nothing happens next," I said. "Mom's affairs are organized. She's healthy. She's fine. Nothing changes in the present. And the rentals are Mom's. Until they're not." Delia said after a moment, "I want to fix things. Between us. I know we haven't been fair to you, with the birthdays and everything. I want to figure out how to fix that." I let that land. I didn't rush toward it or away from it. "I'd like that," I said. "When you're ready, call Mom and tell her you want to come to the next birthday. Don't make it about anything else. Just come." She said she would. I don't know if she believed she meant it. I believed that she was afraid, and that the fear might eventually become something more useful. These things take time. I was patient. I had practice. Priya called the following week. Her call was different, shorter, less strategic. She said she'd been thinking about how things had been for a while, and she felt like she hadn't been a good sister. She said she was sorry. She said it in the slightly rushed way of someone who has scripted an apology and is trying to deliver it before they lose their nerve. I said thank you. I meant it. Dorothy called me the Friday after the meeting to report, with satisfaction, that Delia's car had not appeared in the driveway since the Thursday evening.
Good, she said.
It's not. I don't want her to disappear, I said. She's family. Dorothy made a sound. She'll come back. She just needs to do the math first. I laughed. It was the first time I'd laughed that week. At work, I handled 3 estate transfers in the 2 months following the meeting. One of them was a family very similar to mine, a mother, 3 adult children, competing ideas about fairness. The mother had not organized anything. The 3 children were in a lawyer's office trying to reconstruct what she might have wanted. I sat through the meeting and processed the paperwork and said nothing personal. But driving home that evening, I thought about the October morning at the kitchen table, the calm way my mother had signed her name 4 times, and the notary's stamp pressing down each time with a small, decisive sound. My mother had given me something that went beyond the deed. She'd given me the evidence of having been chosen. Not because I was the oldest or the warmest or the easiest to be around. Because I had sat with her and answered her questions honestly, for years, without asking for anything in return. In the firm's parlance, she'd done her due diligence. And I had passed. There's something I've learned in real estate law that I think about often, not in relation to property, but in relation to people. The recorded document is always more truthful than the conversation that happened around it.
People say things.
They make promises in hallways and implications over dinners and quiet renegotiations in phone calls that the other person is supposed to intuit. None of it means anything until it's filed. My mother knew this. She'd lived long enough to know it. She didn't put her intentions in a conversation. She put them in instruments, witnessed and notarized and delivered to the county recorder's office, where they sat quietly in the public record while her daughters had their dinners and their calls and their carefully managed guest lists. The recorder doesn't care about energy. It doesn't care about who is too negative for celebrations. It just preserves what was put there until someone asks it to speak. That's my story. A kitchen table, a notary's stamp, and 4 property sheets that said everything my mother had been waiting to say. If you had been sitting at that table, if you were Delia, hearing Bernadette read those deeds out loud for the first time, what would you have done when you got home? Would you have called your mother to apologize? Or would you have called a lawyer first? Drop your answer in the comments.